In 1870, in the rolling hills of central Texas, a 12-year-old farm boy named Elias Morgan stepped out to check on his family's small herd of sheep. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, he would be on a path that would take him farther from everything he knew than most people travel in a lifetime, not just in distance, but in who he would eventually become. Decades later, that same boy, now a man, would stand in front of an astonished crowd at a Texas rodeo, performing skills that seemed almost impossible, skills that belonged to a world long vanished. Even he sometimes struggled to believe it himself. His story is the extraordinary tale of survival, adaptation, and transformation on the American frontier, a story that feels almost too wild to be true. We're going to explore what life was really like back then, on the edge of civilization, where the rules of your home simply didn't apply. If you want stories that pull you in, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Whether you're tuning in from Washington, New York, or somewhere in between, drop a comment with your city. It's kind of magical knowing people all over the world are listening to the same story. Alright, let's dive into the frontier. Picture central Texas in May of 1870. The air is warm, pleasant, the kind that makes you drowsy if you sit still in the afternoon. Elias Morgan's family had a modest farm near Fredericksburg, about 100 miles northwest of San Antonio. If you've never been to that part of Texas, imagine gentle hills dotted with oak trees, limestone cliffs, and grass that glows gold in the summer sun. It's a landscape that stretches as far as the eye can see. Elias was the fourth of 7 children. His father had passed away when he was very young, and his mother, Clara, had remarried a man named Joseph Harlan. They weren't rich, but they had land, livestock, and each other. A sturdy frontier family surviving on hard work, hope for rain, and eyes always on the horizon. And that last part mattered more than anything because they were living right next to Comanche territory. Here's something you might not know. The Comanche didn't originate in Texas. They had moved south from the Rocky Mountains, pushed out by stronger tribes to the north. For generations, they survived on the margins, always moving, always hunting, often hungry. Then came the horses. The Spanish introduced horses to the Americas in the 1500s, and they were carefully guarded. But over time, through trade, raids, and stray animals, the plains were filled with them. And the Comanche didn't just learn to ride. They became, in many ways, the finest cavalry the continent had ever seen. Within a few generations, they transformed from a struggling mountain tribe into a dominant power across a territory larger than most European nations. They called themselves Numu, the people. Everyone else called them Comanche, which roughly translates to those who fight us constantly. And honestly, that was fair. So in 1870, the hills where Elias Morgan lived were right on the frontier's edge, and Comanche raids had terrorized Texas settlements for decades. Sometimes they came for horses, sometimes for supplies, and often they took captives, especially children. Now, it's important to understand something about these kidnappings. They weren't random acts of cruelty. They served a purpose. The Comanche, like many plains tribes, had been hit hard by diseases brought by Europeans, smallpox, cholera, measles, illnesses that tore through populations with no warning and no immunity. For tribes like theirs, taking captives, especially young ones who could be adopted and raised as part of the tribe, was a way to survive. That doesn't make it any less terrifying for the children, but it does help explain why it happened. On a warm afternoon in November of 1880, Elias and his younger brother Jacob were sent to watch the family's sheep and shoo crows away from the cornfield. Simple everyday farm chores. They were only a few hundred yards from home, close enough to see smoke curling from the chimney. Then the riders appeared. About a dozen of them, charging over a small ridge at full gallop. Elias would later say he heard them first. The pounding of hooves, the shouting, the war cries. Then everything exploded into motion. He tried to fight. He was 12 years old, and he tried to fight men on horseback. That tells you something about the kind of boy Elias was even then. One of the warriors, a man named Corvin, struck him with the butt of a pistol. When Elias came to, he was tied to a horse, his home shrinking behind him with every gallop. Jacob fell off his horse in the chaos, managing somehow to stumble back home. When their mother asked where Elias was, all Jacob could say was, "Elias, they took him. He's gone." And he was right. The first days were hell. Elias was sunburned, starving, thirsty, and terrified. The raiding party moved constantly, mostly at night, slipping across flat, open plains where nothing blocked the horizon. At one point, Corvin killed a calf they came across. He forced Elias's head into the still warm carcass and made him drink the curdled milk. Elias vomited. Corvin beat him and forced him to eat the vomit. I'm not including this to shock you. It matters because it shows what Elias endured before he started to change. At 12, he was being stripped of everything familiar. Every comfort, every rule of childhood was gone. His family might as well have been on another planet. And then, in the midst of that terror, something inside him shifted. He made a choice. If they wanted him to be Comanche, he would become Comanche. Not just to survive. Not just to wait for someone to rescue him. But because, in that moment, on that endless, sun-scorched plain, it was the only thing that made sense. Soon after, Elias would be forced to flee again. You couldn't kill a medicine man without consequences. Their spiritual authority and the respect they commanded meant that even justified acts of revenge could be deadly. So he ran. He found refuge with a different band of Comanche, led by a young chief who would become legendary across Texas. Kanana Parker. Kanana was the son of a Comanche chief and a white woman named Susanna, who had been captured as a child and fully assimilated into Comanche life. In him, Elias saw what the frontier was all about, living between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, and yet somehow belonging to both. Elias was welcomed into Kanana's band. And for the next several years, he lived entirely as a Comanche warrior. He joined raids. He counted coups against enemies. He learned to hunt buffalo, a deadly game. A full-grown buffalo could weigh over a ton, pivot faster than a horse, and getting close enough to kill one with a bow required incredible skill. And Elias became extraordinary at it. Survival doesn't just teach you skills, it reshapes how you see yourself. The boy who had left his farm at 12 was gone. By 15 he thought, dreamed, and planned as a Comanche. His memories of home felt distant, like someone else's life. The frontier had done its work. Could take a child and transform him completely. There's a detail from Elias's later accounts that I keep coming back to. He talks about hunting wolves and drinking their blood. The Comanche believed that doing so passed on the wolf's traits: speed, endurance, cunning. Years later, when Elias would demonstrate traditional hunting and riding skills at fairs and gatherings, people said there was something different about him. The way he moved, the sharpness in his eyes. Like there was a wildness that no amount of civilization could ever fully erase. Maybe the wolf blood was superstition. Or maybe it was something deeper, a kind of promise to himself. A way of saying, I am fully this now. Whatever it was, Elias survived. And in surviving, he became something entirely new. That's what the frontier demanded of people. Transformation or death. There wasn't usually a middle ground. And Elias was just one boy. One story. Across the vast plains, through decades of conflict, there were thousands of others, each finding their own way to adapt, to survive, to become whatever they needed to become. The sun sets over the Texas hill country in our story. The first stars appear, sharp points in an impossibly vast sky. Out here, without city lights, the stars are everywhere. The Milky Way stretches overhead, a river of silver spilling across the night. Somewhere on the plains, a 15-year-old Elias rides back to camp after a successful hunt. His horse is sweating and tired. He is too. That kind of deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from hard, honest work. The smell of sagebrush and dry grass drifts on a cooling breeze. The hills behind him fade to purple in the last light of the day. Ahead, the faint glow of campfires, the signs of his people, his home. He doesn't think about his old Texas farm anymore. He doesn't think about his mother or his siblings, people he now believes are gone. Tonight, wrapped in buffalo robes beside a dying fire, he will dream in the Comanche tongue. of horses, hunts, and endless grasslands, the world that has become his own. The frontier was brutal, no one could deny that, but it was also beautiful. Sunsets that painted the sky red and orange. The silence of the prairie, broken only by coyotes and the whisper of the wind through the grass. The closeness of a community where every life depended on every other. Tonight there will be meat on the fire. The camp smells of roasting buffalo, fat sizzling and dripping into the flames. Stories will be told. Children will drift to sleep listening to their elders. Somewhere someone will sing the old songs. Tomorrow will come with its own challenges. But right now Elias is alive. He belongs. He has a purpose. And on the frontier that was everything. The stars wheel overhead. The campfires burn low. Across the wild country, countless survival stories are unfolding, each unique, each demanding everything from the people living them. We'll return to more of those stories. But for now, let's linger here a little longer, under these endless stars, where even the harshest chapters of frontier life could hold moments of peace. Elias wasn't alone in learning these harsh lessons. All across the West, people were discovering day by day what it truly took to survive. Some of those lessons were downright extraordinary. Take Kit Carson. You've probably heard the name. By 1846, Carson was already a legend, a mountain man, scout, and guide whose exploits made newspapers back east swoon. But in December of that year, deep in the Southern California desert, Carson found himself in a situation that would have killed almost anyone else. Here's what happened. Carson was with about 150 American soldiers and Marines, fresh from a brutal clash with Mexican cavalry near San Diego. They technically won, but at a heavy cost. 18 men were dead. Dozens more were wounded, too badly to even walk. And now they were trapped. Enemy forces had them pinned on a rocky hill. No escape, almost no water, food running dangerously low. The wounded were showing early signs of infection, because this was 1860. And antibiotics wouldn't exist for another century. Someone had to go for help. Someone had to slip through enemy lines, cross 30 miles of hostile desert, and reach the American-held port at San Diego. Kit Carson volunteered. So did a young Navy lieutenant named Edward Beale, along with a Diagueno guide named Paqua. They waited until nightfall. Then they began crawling. Picture it. 3 men, flat on their stomachs, inching across the rocky desert floor under a moonless sky. They couldn't carry metal canteens. The clink and slosh would give them away. One long drink of water, then everything else was left behind. Soon Carson and Beale realized their boots were too loud on the stones. So they kicked them off, tucked them into their belts, and kept crawling barefoot. They passed right by enemy sentries. At one point, a mounted soldier stopped barely 15 feet from where Carson pressed himself to the ground. The man lit a cigarette, sat back, and seemed to enjoy the quiet night. Carson didn't move. He pressed his ear to the dirt. And then he heard something incredible, a rhythmic thumping beneath his hands. Lieutenant Beale's heartbeat. The young officer was terrified, so much so that Carson could feel it thumping through the earth itself. Beale whispered that they should fight. Carson told him to stay down. They'd been in worse spots before. Eventually, the soldier finished his smoke and rode away. They kept crawling. Somewhere along the line, their boots slipped free from their belts and vanished into the darkness. No time to look back. Ahead lay 30 miles of cactus-strewn desert. Barefoot. To lower their chances of capture, they split up. Each man chose a different route to San Diego. Carson, true to form, took the longest and most dangerous path. He walked through the night. He walked through the next day. He walked through another night, stepping on rocks, cacti, and who knows what else hiding in the darkness. When he finally stumbled into the American camp outside San Diego, his feet were shredded. He could barely stand. Took more than a week before he could walk normally again. In his memoirs, Carson summed it up in a few words. They finally made it through, but lost their shoes along the way. Over prickly pear, over rocks, barefoot. That was his description of one of the most grueling survival treks in American military history. Meanwhile, the men left behind on the hill had begun eating their mules. Literally. They started with the weakest animals, stewing the meat into a thin, greasy soup many couldn't even stomach. They dug through the sandy soil searching for moisture, squeezing wet earth through cloth to salvage a few muddy drops. Just as they prepared for a desperate march to San Diego, relief arrived. Carson had made it. All three of them had. Though Beale and Paqua were so weak, they had to be carried onto a ship in San Diego harbor. The hill where those soldiers survived became a local landmark. People called it Mule Hill, for obvious reasons. While Carson was crawling barefoot across the California desert that winter, something even worse was unfolding hundreds of miles to the north, in the Sierra Nevada mountains. A tragedy that would haunt history for over a century. You already know the name. The Donner Party. 87 people had left Missouri that spring, bound for California. Families mostly, men, women, children, searching for a new life out west. More than half were kids, the youngest just months old. They fell behind schedule. Broken wagons, sick animals, rivers that took longer to cross than expected. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, it was late October. Winter was on its way, and mountain passes would soon close under snow. Then they made a fateful choice. A man named Lansford Hastings had published a guidebook claiming a shortcut through the Utah desert would save weeks. It would get them to California before the snow fell. 'Twas a lie. Hastings had never traveled that route himself. He'd only looked at a map and assumed it would work. Didn't. The so-called shortcut ended up adding nearly a month to their journey. By the time they reached the eastern base of the Sierra Nevada, it was already early November. And then the snow came. Not just a dusting. Not a normal winter storm. 20 feet of it, or maybe even more. Snow so deep that the first floors of the cabins they built disappeared completely. If you visit the site today, you can still see old trees with their trunks chopped off 20 feet above the ground, exactly where the snow had reached. Only tiny stubs stuck up above the white, silent tomb of winter. They were trapped, all 87 of them, for months. First they clung to hope. Someone would notice they hadn't arrived. Someone would come for them. They rationed food, made careful plans, tried not to panic. But the snow kept falling. The days stretched into weeks. No one came. Food ran out fast. They killed their livestock, boiled the hides into a thin, tasteless paste, spooning it into the mouths of children while trying not to watch them gag. When the hides were gone, they ate bark, twigs, ooze, anything that could give them calories. And then people started to die. The men first, the ones doing the hardest work. Cutting wood, digging paths through snow, trying to keep the camp livable. One by one they weakened, stopped rising, stopped breathing. Then came the choice that would haunt the survivors forever. They began eating the dead. This is the part of the story everyone remembers, the horror that made the Donner Party infamous. But here's what most people don't realize. They didn't do it lightly. They resisted for as long as possible. Some died rather than eat human flesh. Those who did, most did it to keep their children alive. They marked the bodies carefully, so no one accidentally ate a loved one. Even at the absolute end there were rules, lines they refused to cross. Most of them anyway. And then there was Louis Keseberg. When rescue parties finally reached the Sierra Passes in the spring of 1847, they found Louis Keseberg alone in his cabin, surrounded by human remains. A cooking pot sat nearby with what looked like fresh liver. They asked him what had happened to the rest of the party. He claimed they had all died. When pressed about Mrs. Donner, he said she had gotten lost in the snow one night. He told them he'd made her a cup of coffee and laid her down to rest, but by morning she was dead. Then the question came about the pot. Keseberg reportedly said, "Yeah, that was Mrs. Donner." And then, in words the rescuers never forgot, he explained why he hadn't eaten the beef left for him earlier. Human meat, he said, was sweeter. And according to him, the liver was the best part. It's grim. It's haunting. And it's recorded in multiple eyewitness accounts. Keseberg lived on for another 50 years. avoided, whispered about. He even tried to sue a newspaper for calling him a cannibal. He lost. Today, the site is a California state park, museum, a monument. Donner Lake, renamed from Truckee Lake, carries the weight of what happened there. 41 of the 87 pioneers died. Most were men. Women and children survived at higher rates. Maybe because men burned calories faster, or maybe because the women were willing to do whatever it took to save their children. No one really knows. What's striking about the Donner Party is this. They weren't foolish. They weren't weak. They were ordinary families, making one catastrophic choice based on faulty information. Trusted the wrong guide. Took the wrong shortcut. And the wilderness didn't care. It didn't care how hard you'd worked, how much you deserved to survive, how good your intentions were. The frontier was vast, indifferent, waiting, but enough about death. Let's return to Herman. By now, Herman was becoming a legend in his adopted Comanche tribe. By his late teens, he had taken part in countless raids, counted coups against enemies, and earned a reputation for being fearless. Survival among the Comanche wasn't just about individual toughness. It was about trust, coordination, knowing when to rely on others. A raid wasn't chaos, it was precision. Scouts moved ahead. Flankers protected the sides. Everyone knew their role. And when things went wrong, as they often did, the group stayed together. Herman learned this quickly on his first major raid across the Rio Grande. The target, horses. Horses were wealth, status, and survival rolled into one. A warrior measured his worth by his herd, and a young man hoping to marry needed horses to give as gifts. They rode south into sparsely populated ranchlands, vulnerable and lightly defended, mostly traveling at night, guided by the stars. By day, they hid in dry creek beds, shaded arroyos, or behind rocky outcrops. Herman felt nervous, though he tried not to show it. This wasn't practice. This was real. Lives were on the line. The raid could have ended in disaster, but it went smoothly. They struck a ranch just before dawn, gathered the horses, and turned north. By sunrise, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. A Mexican patrol. More riders than expected, maybe 30 strong, charging fast. Herman's first instinct was to scatter, run for his life. But the seasoned warriors didn't flinch. They formed a moving shield, kept the herd together, and defended themselves while retreating. Arrows cut through the air with impossible precision. The riders twisted and turned on horseback like it was second nature. Because it was. By the time they crossed the river, most of the horses were safe. One young warrior had taken an arrow to the shoulder. He laughed anyway, proud to have survived. That night, an elder spoke words that Herman never forgot. Alone you survive today. Together you survive tomorrow. Years later, Herman would remember another lesson from survival. The wolf. He had killed wolves and drank their blood. The Comanche believed it passed on speed, cunning, endurance, the instincts to survive where most would fail. Herman didn't do it because anyone told him to. He did it because he wanted those traits, because he had fully committed to being one of them. And later in life, people said there was a difference in his gaze. Something untamed. A spark that spoke of plains and wild nights, of life lived at the edge of danger. The camp was now silent under the night sky. Truly dark, the kind of darkness you only find far from towns. No glow on the horizon. Just stars, moonlight, and open sky. Herman rested in a buffalo hide lodge, its flap open to the breeze. Dogs settled by the fire. Children's whispers faded. An old woman hummed a soft song somewhere nearby. Smoke and tanned leather mixed with the warmth of the lodge, comforting after years of hardship. The buffalo robes were worn smooth, familiar. Tomorrow might bring another raid, another hunt, another test. But tonight there was warmth, breathing, a fire dying to embers, an owl calling in the distance. The Comanche believed, every day above ground is a gift from the spirits. Herman understood that now. After everything he had endured, simply being alive felt miraculous. Sleep came easily when exhaustion had earned it. And Herman Lehman, once an 11-year-old farm boy, was very, very tired. He closed his eyes. The same stars humans had gazed at since the dawn of time wheeled above him. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf moved with quiet authority, watching patient, centuries-old wisdom in its eyes. Then it disappeared. Herman returned from his trials transformed. The fear of the boy he once was had vanished. In his place stood a new man, part of the plains, part of the tribe, fully belonging where most white settlers never would. The elders treated him differently now. He wasn't a captive, not an adopted son. He was one of them, a Comanche warrior with his own vision, his own strength, his own place. The Texas night sky stretched endlessly above. Miles from any town, the Milky Way arced from horizon to horizon. Meteors streaked occasionally, ancient campfires of light. Herman lay on his back, staring upward, thinking, not about fear or loss, but about the journey he had lived, the path ahead, and what it all meant. The Comanche believed stars were the campfires of ancestors, that when you died, you joined them, a river of light carrying the spirits of those who came before. Herman could feel their presence, not judgment, just a watchful chain of survival stretching back generations. The fire in the lodge burned low. Outside, prairie grass rustled. A night bird called, a sound that could lull even the most restless to sleep. The frontier wasn't only danger, violence, and death. It was this: quiet nights, warm fires, the simple, profound relief of being alive after a day where survival was never guaranteed. Herman pulled the buffalo robe closer. Tomorrow would bring what it would. But right now there was peace. Stars continued their slow rotation. The wind whispered through the grass. Across the frontier, in 1,000 camps, cabins, and lodges, countless others were falling asleep, each with their own battles, their own victories. This is survival, not just in dramatic moments, though those exist, but in the quiet intervals, sharing a meal, tending a fire, lying down at night and trusting you'll wake again. The coyote's song rose and fell, a mournful harmony, haunting yet beautiful. Herman had grown to love it. It was proof the night was alive, that he was part of something bigger than himself. Sleep came easy when you'd earned it. And on the frontier, everyone was always tired enough. The frontier had a way of throwing together people from completely different worlds, strangers forced to depend on each other to survive, bound by nothing but circumstance and grit. Take the Buffalo Soldiers, for example. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. Army formed 4 regiments of black soldiers. Many were former slaves, now free, and now being sent west into the raw, untamed frontier. The dangers were the same as anyone else's. Starvation, ambushes, exposure, death lurking in every canyon, every stretch of open prairie. The name Buffalo Soldier likely came from the Comanche or Cheyenne. Some say it was because their hair reminded native warriors of buffalo fur. Others say it came from the buffalo hide coats the army issued to help them survive the harsh winters. Whatever the origin, the name stuck, and so did their reputation. These men had something to prove. And prove it they did again and again, in situations that would have shattered ordinary soldiers. One of them was Pompey Factor. Born in 1849 to a father who had escaped slavery and a mother from the Biloxi tribe, Factor grew up in northern Mexico's mountains before returning to Texas after the war. He knew the frontier like the back of his hand, how to track, hunt, survive in a place most people couldn't last a week. When he joined the Buffalo Soldiers as a scout, he brought skills the army desperately needed. September 1874, Eastern Colorado. 6 men, Factor among them, found themselves in a situation the frontier specialized in. Outnumbered, surrounded, and far from help. Billy Dixon was there too, already famous for a shot at adobe walls that had knocked a Comanche chief clean off his horse from nearly a mile away. Alongside them were 4 soldiers and another scout, Amos Chapman. They were carrying messages across Comanche territory when suddenly, over 100 mounted warriors appeared. Kiowa and Comanche, fast, aggressive, and looking for blood. The 6 men had barely a heartbeat to decide. There was no outrunning that many riders. No hiding on the flat prairie. Their only option, fight. The first volley killed a horse and left Private George Smith bleeding, unable to move. 70 yards from cover, the others assumed he was dead. With over 100 enemies circling, no one could reach him. They dove into a buffalo wallow, a shallow depression maybe 10 feet across, and began digging, hands and knives scooping mud as bullets and arrows tore the earth around them. Then Chapman was hit. A bullet shattered his leg below the knee. Billy Dixon did something reckless. He ran 70 yards across open ground, lifted Chapman onto his shoulders, and carried him back. Dead weight, soaked in mud, bullets flying, but he made it. Then Private Peter Roth did the same for Smith, dragging him back to safety. He was dying, but at least he wasn't alone. 4 hours, 6 men held off more than 100 attackers. Waves of warriors came. Disciplined rifle fire answered every advance. Then the weather turned. Cold rain fell, mixing with blood and mud in the wallow. They shivered all night, wounded worsening, trapped in the muck. Smith didn't make it. His final words were a whisper for his mother. They buried him in the mud before dawn. At first light, Dixon crawled out, stumbling less than a mile before encountering a supply column searching for them. Relief had come. All 6 men were eventually awarded the Medal of Honor, Smith included. The army wanted everyone to know what they endured. Buffalo soldiers continued to serve for decades, earning 18 Medals of Honor in total, slowly forcing respect from a nation that had doubted them. The frontier didn't care about prejudice. It only asked, "Can you survive?" And survive they did. Meanwhile, Roman Nose, one of the Cheyennes' most feared warriors, had been watching. 4 hours he had held back, not out of fear, but because he knew the cost of charging blindly into disciplined rifle fire. Whispers spread among the warriors. An elder woman confronted him, calling him a coward while young men died in battle. Roman Nose stood, donned his war bonnet, painted himself for war, and rode into the fight. The scouts waited until the attackers were 50 yards away, then opened fire. Roman Nose was hit in the spine, held his seat for a few heartbeats, then fell. Carried back to the village, he died that night, just as he had predicted. But the scouts were still trapped. By sunset, 4 men were dead, 18 wounded, water nearly gone, river fouled with blood and carcasses, food almost gone, ammunition low, and hundreds of warriors still circling. That night, Major Forsyth called for volunteers. Someone had to cross 70 miles of open prairie, hostile, enemy-filled prairie, to get help. 70 miles, with bullets flying, against the wild, relentless frontier. 2 men stepped forward. A young scout, just 19, named Jack Stillwell, and an old French-Canadian trapper called Pierre Trudeau. They set out after midnight, moving backward through shallow water to throw off anyone tracking them. The second day was worse than the first. More attacks, more injured men. Horses that had died now bloating under the scorching sun. The smell thick and impossible to forget. At one point, Lieutenant Beecher, lying paralyzed in the sand, called out. Major Forsyth crawled over. "I've got my death wound, sir," Beecher said. "Shot in the side. I'm dying." "No, Beecher. No," Forsyth replied, disbelief in his voice. "Yes, good night," came the faint reply. And then barely a whisper. "My poor mother." He was only 27 days. 8 days trapped on a sandbar no bigger than a living room, surrounded by men who wanted them dead. Almost no food, almost no clean water, wounds festering in summer heat. Their only sustenance, horse meat. First it was tough but edible. By day 3, it had gone green at the edges, the smell enough to make eyes water. They ate it anyway. Starving wasn't an option. Water was worse. The river, shallow and stagnant, filled with blood and decaying horse carcasses. They dug holes in the sand to filter some of it out, but what they drank still made men sick. They drank it anyway. Dying of thirst was the alternative. The wounded suffered the most. Bullets drew flies, infection spread fast, and fever left men delirious, begging for water or food barely fit for dogs. Forsyth's leg wound was critical. A bullet lodged near his femoral artery. No one had the skill to operate safely, so he did it himself. With a razor, no anesthesia, biting down on a stick. He cut into his own flesh and dug the bullet out as the others watched. Somehow he survived. By the third day, Forsyth sent out 2 more runners, John Donovan and Allison Pilley, into the unknown, each step a risk of capture or death. By day 6, most men had given up hope. No help was coming. They expected to die there, their bones scattered by coyotes. Then, on September 25, 8 days after the first attack, they heard it. Hoofbeats. They grabbed rifles, ready for one final stand. A voice cut through the morning mist. "Hold your fire. We're Americans." The 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Carpenter. The runners had made it. Relief had arrived. What the soldiers found was a scene from a nightmare. 50 dead horses rotting on the sandbar. 5 dead men. 10 wounded. The survivors gaunt, filthy, covered in flies and blood. The site would later be named Beecher Island. All 6 men who had risked everything survived. Each of the runners and the 2 scouts who fought on the island received the Medal of Honor. Roman nose. His body was placed on a funeral scaffold, left to the elements in the traditional Cheyenne way. His exact resting place is lost to history. What stays with me about Roman Nose isn't the way he died. It's his conviction. He truly believed that the way he ate, refusing food touched by metal utensils, had sealed his fate. And maybe it did. Not the bullet, not the enemy, but the certainty that the bullet would come. Belief is a powerful thing. What we believe shapes what we do. And what we do shapes what happens to us. Roman Nose had charged straight into enemy fire because he believed it was his fate. Would a man who thought himself invincible have done the same? We'll never know. The frontier was full of questions like that. Full of choices with no right answers. Full of endings you didn't see coming. When Herman returned to visit the reservation later in life, it was always bittersweet. It was a joy to see old friends again. To speak Comanche. To fall back into rhythms that felt more natural than the ways of white men ever had. But it was painful too. Painful to see proud warriors living in small, cramped houses. Painful to see them farming patches of land that barely produced enough to survive. Hardest of all was seeing the children, born after the old ways were gone, who had never known the open plains and believed that reservation life was simply how the world worked. Quanah Parker, by then, had adapted better than most. He had become a leader, a spokesman for his people. He learned how to navigate government bureaucracy, an institution designed to erase his culture, and found ways to protect his people without losing himself completely. He built the Star House, a sprawling home with 11 rooms. A star painted on the roof so that if his mother's spirit ever searched for him, she could find her way. A home for his family, and for visitors from faraway places. Quanah had become famous in his own right. Presidents sought him out. Theodore Roosevelt hunted wolves with him. He traveled to Washington, fighting for better treatment of his people. But Herman could still see the man he had ridden with on the plains. Quanah was still the same warrior. Still carried grief for the old ways. Still woke some mornings expecting to hear the thunder of hooves and the cries of the hunt, only to find silence instead. Quanah's mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, had been a white girl captured by the Comanche, like Herman himself. She lived among them for decades, married a chief, raised children, and when she was recaptured by the Texas Rangers in 1860, she never fully recovered. She spent her life mourning a world that had been stolen from her. Some said she died of a broken heart. Maybe she did. Maybe it was influenza. Perhaps it was both. Quanah never stopped missing her. Never stopped wondering what life might have been like for her, torn between 2 worlds, the same tension Herman carried now. It was why the 2 men understood each other so deeply. Both had lived between worlds. Both carried the weight of that in-between life. By then, the frontier Herman had known was gone. Not just changed, vanished. Railroads cut across the plains. The buffalo were nearly extinct. The open range had been fenced, subdivided, turned into ranches. You could ride across Texas and barely feel like you had left civilization. Herman watched it happen, inch by inch, year by year, like a friend aging before your eyes. But the memories remained sharp. Even decades later, Herman could close his eyes and be back on the plains. Feel the horse beneath him. Smell sage and sun-baked grass. Hear the distant thunder of hooves, the war cries of a world long gone, the deep silence of the prairie at night. Those memories were both a gift and a burden. They connected him to something real. But they also reminded him of everything he had lost. Freedom, wildness, the limitless possibilities of youth. His children grew up hearing some stories. Not all of them. Some things Herman kept to himself. But they understood their father was different. That he had lived a life most only ever read about. They were proud, even if they didn't fully grasp the scale of it. By 1925, Herman was in his mid-60s, gray-haired, slower, but still strong in ways that surprised those who didn't know his past. That summer, a rodeo came to Mason County. The organizers had an idea. What if Herman Lehman could demonstrate what Comanche hunting had looked like? A living history, educational, a chance for people to glimpse a past that was slipping away with every year. Herman hesitated. The old ways were sacred. Not entertainment, not a performance for strangers. But another part of him wanted people to see, to understand even just a little what had been lost. He agreed. The day of the demonstration dawned hot, heavy, and unrelenting over central Texas. August heat, the kind that presses down on your shoulders and refuses to lift. The rodeo grounds were alive. Families in wide-brimmed hats. Cowboys leaning against fences. Curious locals murmuring to one another. Newspaper reporters poised with notebooks, pens ready to capture every moment. Herman arrived in buckskin, well-worn or carefully made to look that way. A headdress rested lightly on his head, not something he'd ever wear on a real hunt, but exactly what the crowd expected. Before mounting, he stood perfectly still, eyes closed. The roar of voices dimmed. The heat faded. All that remained was the pulse of his own heart, and the memory of wind sweeping across the open plains. He mounted bareback. No saddle, no bridle, just a simple halter the Comanche way. The horse responded to his weight, his knees, his very intention. His hands were free, ready for whatever came next. The crowd fell silent. A yearling calf was released into the arena, startled by the noise and the heat and the anticipation. Herman gave a war cry, not for show but from deep inside. Then he moved. In a few heartbeats, the calf was down. His arrow flew true. He dismounted, cut the throat, opened the belly, pulled out the liver, and ate it raw. Blood dripped down his hands, his chin. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some cheered. Some looked away. Most just stared transfixed. A gray-haired man moving like someone from another time, another world. Herman barely noticed them. For a moment he was young again, wild again, free. That night, he sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The same stars he had watched all his life. The same stars the Comanche had named, told stories about. Campfires of the ancestors, they said. Herman hoped it was true. He thought of those he had known who were gone. Quanah still lived, but age was creeping in. Their generation was fading. Soon no one would remember the open plains, the wildlife. His wife came and sat beside him. She said nothing. She understood when silence mattered. He took her hand. This was his life now. The house, porch, the children sleeping inside. Ordinary, precious things. The frontier had given him much, and taken much too. Maybe that was always the trade. You don't survive something like that unchanged. The question isn't whether you'll be different. It's what you do with that difference. Herman had done his best. When sleep came that night, it came gently. He died in 1932 at 72. In his own bed. In his own home. Surrounded by family. A quiet ending for a man who had lived through more than most could imagine. And that is the strange, powerful thing about Herman Lehmann. It wasn't just superstition. Not just ritual. Maybe it was something else entirely. Commitment. Declaration. I am fully, completely this thing now. He survived. And in surviving he became something entirely new. The frontier demanded that. Transformation or death. There was rarely a middle ground. And Herman's story was just one of many. One boy on the plains. Across hundreds of thousands of square miles. Over nearly a century of conflict. Countless others had their own stories. Each adapting, surviving, becoming whatever they needed to become. Now imagine the Texas hill country at sunset. The first stars blink awake, one by one, in a sky so vast it seems impossible. Out here, far from electric light, the heavens are crowded with them. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a silver river. Somewhere on the plains, 15-year-old Herman rides back toward camp after a hunt. His horse is tired. He is tired too, the kind of fatigue that comes from real work, real struggle, real life. The scent of sage and dry grass drifts through the air. A cool breeze from the northwest hints that summer won't last forever. Behind him, the hills fade to purple. Ahead, the faint glow of campfires. His people. His home. Herman doesn't think about Texas farms anymore. He doesn't think about his mother or his siblings, whom he believes are gone forever. Tonight, he'll sleep rolled in buffalo robes beside a dying fire. He'll dream in Comanche, horses, and endless grasslands that have become his entire world. The frontier was harsh, relentless, unforgiving, and yet could be beautiful. Sunsets that set the sky ablaze. Orange, red, purple. The silence of the prairie at night, broken only by coyotes and the whisper of wind through grass. Communities bound tightly together, surviving because they had no choice but to rely on one another. Tonight there will be meat. The camp smells of roasting buffalo, fat sizzling and dripping into flames. Stories will be told. Children will fall asleep listening to elders. Somewhere someone will sing the old songs. Tomorrow will come, whatever it brings. But right now, here in this moment, Herman Lehmann is alive. He belongs. He has purpose. And on the frontier that was everything. The stars will slowly overhead. Campfires burn low. Across thousands of miles of wild country, countless other survival stories unfold. Each one unique. Each one demanding everything from the people living it. We'll get to them soon enough. But for now, let's stay here a little longer under these endless stars, where even the most brutal chapters of frontier life contain moments of peace. Herman wasn't the only one learning hard lessons out there. All across the American West, people were discovering, day by day, what it really took to survive. And some of those lessons were absolutely wild. Take Kit Carson. By 1846, Carson was already famous. A mountain man, a guide, the kind of figure newspapers back east loved to write about. But that December, deep in the Southern California desert, he found himself in a situation that would have killed almost anyone else. Carson was traveling with about 150 American soldiers and Marines who had just fought a brutal battle against Mexican cavalry near San Diego. They technically won, but at a terrible cost. 18 dead. Dozens wounded, some so badly they could not walk. And now, they were trapped. Mexican forces surrounded them on a rocky hill. Water was nearly gone. Food was running out. Infected wounds festered. The year was 1846. Antibiotics were still a century away. Someone had to get help. Someone had to crawl through enemy lines, across 30 miles of hostile desert, and reach San Diego. Carson volunteered. So did Navy Lieutenant Edward Beale and a native guide named Kamuka. They waited until nightfall. Then they crawled. 3 men, flat on their bellies, inching across jagged rocks. Canteens were forbidden. The sloshing would give them away. One long drink and then nothing. Their boots were too loud, so they took them off and crawled barefoot. At one point, A Mexican soldier on horseback stopped less than 15 feet away. Lit a cigarette. Smoked slowly, deliberately. Carson pressed his ear to the dirt. Then he heard it. A rhythmic thumping through the ground. Beale's heartbeat. So loud Carson could feel it through the earth. Beale whispered they should fight. Carson told him to stay still. They'd been in worse spots before. The soldier finished his cigarette and rode off. They kept moving. Somewhere along the way, their boots slipped from their belts and vanished into the darkness. No time to look back. 30 miles, barefoot, through cactus and rocks and whatever else the desert hid. They split up to reduce the chance of capture. Carson chose the longest, most dangerous route. He walked through the night, through the next day, through another night. Every step brought pain. Every cactus, every rock tore at his feet. When he finally staggered into the American camp outside San Diego, he could barely stand. His feet were destroyed. In his memoirs, Carson described it in just 2 sentences. They got through. But they had the misfortune of losing their shoes. That's it. That's how Kit Carson described one of the most grueling desert treks in American history. And while he crawled barefoot through cactus-strewn sand under a cold winter moon, something far worse was unfolding 500 miles north, in the Sierra Nevada mountains. You already know the name. The Donner Party. 87 settlers. Families. More than half were children. They were late. Broken wagons. Sick animals. Rivers too high to cross on schedule. Delays piling on top of delays. Then they trusted the wrong man. Lansford Hastings promised a shortcut through the Utah desert. He had never traveled it himself. He just looked at a map and guessed. The shortcut added nearly a month. By the time they reached the eastern base of the Sierras, winter had arrived. Not a dusting. Not a storm. 20 feet of snow. Cabins buried to the windows. They were trapped for months. Food ran out. They ate livestock, then hides, then bark, then shoes, and finally the dead. It wasn't casual. It wasn't choice. Some refused and died. Most who ate the dead did it to save their children. They marked bodies carefully, so no one accidentally ate a family member. When rescuers finally arrived, they found Louis Keseberg alone, surrounded by remains. He admitted that he preferred human meat to beef. He lived another 50 years. Whispered about. Avoided. Remembered. 41 of the 87 died. Not because they were weak. Not because they weren't brave. Because they made one bad decision based on bad information. The frontier didn't care about intentions. It didn't care how hard you tried. It was enormous. Indifferent. Waiting. Not everyone survived by running. Some refused to back down. Jack Hayes was one of them. In 1841, Hayes rode alone into Comanche territory near Enchanted Rock, a massive granite dome sacred to the tribes. 30 warriors charged him. He didn't flee. He ran up, wedged himself into a crack in the rock. He didn't fire wildly. He conserved ammunition, let the attackers get close, then fired once. Each shot counted. Hours passed. The Comanche began to believe the spirits protected him. Finally, gunfire from below. Help had arrived. The warriors vanished. They named him Captain Yak. Too brave or stupidly brave. From the Comanche, it was a compliment. Survival on the frontier wasn't just toughness. It was calm. Carson lying still while a soldier smoked above him. Men on Mule Hill eating horses and squeezing water from mud. Herman learning to read clouds, animals, and stars. The worst thing you could do in a crisis was panic. Herman learned that slowly, over years with a Comanche. He drank wolf blood, went on vision quests, saw himself become something else. Not a captive, not adopted. One of them. The buffalo disappeared. The soldiers came. The old world collapsed. Herman stood between 2 lives. The warrior, farm boy, and like everyone else on the frontier, he faced the same question the land always asked. The plains stretched flat and golden under a late summer sky. Somewhere out there, A Cheyenne warrior named Roman Nose was about to ride into a fight he knew would kill him. Roman Nose was 45 years old. He had been fighting white soldiers and settlers for decades. Countless battles, countless raids. Never seriously wounded. Not once. His people believed he was protected by powerful medicine, specifically by his war bonnet. This was no ordinary headdress. It had been made for him by a Lakota holy man named White Bull, in a ceremony that lasted days. A single buffalo horn rose from the forehead. A long tail of young buffalo hide trailed behind him, brushing the ground even on horseback. 40 eagle feathers ran down its length, alternating red and black. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The medicine was said to be even more so. White Bull had given him rules. The bonnet would protect him from bullets, if and only if he obeyed them. The most important rule: never eat food prepared with metal utensils. Iron was the white man's medicine. It would cancel the protection. For 8 years, Roman Nose followed the rules perfectly. At feasts, he asked how food was prepared. On raids, he ate only what he knew was safe. 8 years of bullets flying past him, around him, never hitting. Warriors fell beside him. He rode on. His reputation grew until his name struck fear across the plains. Then, on the night of September 16, it all went wrong. Roman Nose was camped with a large war party. Cheyenne, Sioux, Arapaho warriors. They had spotted a small group of army scouts nearby. Easy targets. Attack at dawn. Take horses, weapons. A Sioux woman was cooking for the camp that night. She served Roman Nose freshly fried bread. He ate without thinking. It wasn't until after he finished that someone noticed. The woman had used a metal fork to turn the bread while cooking. Roman Nose had eaten food touched by iron. Superstition. Maybe. But belief doesn't bend to reason. What matters isn't whether something is objectively true. It's whether you believe it's true. And Roman Nose believed, completely, that his medicine was broken. He sat in silence, feeling the weight of it. The ceremony to restore the bonnet's power would take days. Days he didn't have. The attack was planned for dawn. "I will die today," he said to the warriors around him. "But I will go anyway." 12 miles away, 50 Army scouts made camp near the Arickaree Fork of the Republican River. Major George Forsyth led them, a Civil War veteran hardened by Gettysburg and the Shenandoah Valley. Lieutenant Frederick Beecher, nephew of abolitionist preacher Henry Ward Beecher, was second in command. This was no ordinary army unit. Hand-picked men, sharpshooters, armed with Spencer repeating rifles. 7 shots without reloading. They didn't know that hundreds of warriors were circling, waiting, watching from the hills. At dawn on September 17th it began. The first warning came as thunder from the west. Horses stampeding. War cries erupting in every direction. Arrows and bullets cut the morning air. Forsyth made a decision in a heartbeat. "In the river," he shouted. "Get to the island. Dig in. Knee-deep water. Sand under hands and knives." They dug. Piled earth into rough walls while bullets kicked dirt into their faces. The horses that hadn't fled were dead within minutes. Their bodies dragged into a circle, forming a crude barricade. Dead horses stop bullets better than sand. The warriors attacked in waves, charging, firing, wheeling away. Each wave came closer. Each wave claimed men. Lieutenant Beecher was hit through the spine early. Paralyzed from the waist down. He kept firing where he lay. Dr. John H. Moores, the surgeon, was shot through the head. Gone instantly. Major Forsyth took 3 hits. Thigh, leg, grazing head. Still he held the line. The Spencer rifles changed everything. Single-shot rifles meant vulnerability during reload. 7 shots. Reload. 7 more shots. The warriors couldn't close the distance. By mid-afternoon, Roman Nose still watched from the hills. Not fear. Knowledge. He knew exactly what would happen if he charged. Whispers spread through the Cheyenne ranks. An old woman stepped forward. Called him a coward. Said young men were dying while he lingered. Roman nose stood. He donned his war bonnet, painted his face, mounted his horse, and rode down the slope, gathering warriors as he went. The men on the island saw him. The headdress, the horn, the feathers. "This is it," one whispered. "Here comes Roman nose." The charge, full speed, unflinching, precise. Roman nose led the front, straight into rifle fire. The scouts held their shots until 50 yards, then fired. Bang. He stayed mounted for seconds, then slid from the horse. His warriors carried him back. He died that night, just as he had predicted. By sunset, 4 scouts were dead. 10 wounded. Almost no water. The river a mix of blood and rotting horses. Food nearly gone. Ammunition low. Hundreds of warriors still waiting. That night, Forsyth called for volunteers to ride for help. 70 miles to Fort Wallace. Open prairie crawling with enemies. 2 men stepped forward. Jack Stillwell, 19, scout. Pierre Trudeau, old French-Canadian trapper. They left after midnight, walking backward through the river to confuse anyone tracking them. The second day was worse. More attacks, more wounded. Dead horses bloating in the sun, the smell unbearable. Lieutenant Beecher, barely conscious, called to Forsyth. "I have my death wound, General. I am dying." "No, Beecher," Forsyth replied. "Yes, good night." His last words were barely audible. "My poor mother, 27 years old. Days. 8 days on a sandbar no bigger than a living room. 8 days with almost no food, almost no clean water. Wounds festering in the summer heat. Horse meat was all they had. Tough at first, then green around the edges, stinking, curling with decay. River water, filtered through sand, still made them sick. They drank it anyway. Starvation, thirst, they had no choice. Forsyth's leg wound became a crisis. The bullet lodged near his femoral artery. No doctor could safely remove it. So he did it himself. Razor. Biting down on a stick. Cutting into his own flesh while the men watched, holding their breath. By day 6, hope was slipping. Most had already given up. Then, on September 25th, hoofbeats. A voice cut through the morning mist. "Hold your fire. We're Americans." The 10th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldiers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Carpenter. Relief had arrived. The island would later be named Beecher Island. All 6 runners survived. 4 received the Medal of Honor. Roman nose. His body went to a traditional Cheyenne funeral scaffold. His burial site lost to history. What lingers isn't just the heroism, it's belief. Roman nose believed his fate had been sealed the moment he ate food touched by iron. Perhaps that belief killed him. Not the bullet, but the certainty that the bullet would come. Belief is a force. What we believe shapes what we do. And what we do shapes what happens to us. He believed he would die and rode straight into fire. Would a man who believed he was invulnerable have done the same? We'll never know. Afterward, Herman Lehman tried to return to the life he had lost. He cut his hair, wore American clothes, worked the farm. He tried to remember Herman, the boy from Texas, rather than the Comanche warrior he had become. It didn't fully work. You don't erase years of your life. You don't forget skills your body learned so deeply they've become instinct. Sometimes he caught himself moving the Comanche way, holding the reins differently, watching the wind, reading clouds, doing things that made his family nervous. Sometimes he dreamed in Comanche, woke up disoriented, unsure where he was. But he kept trying. For his mother, if nothing else. She had waited, hoped, believed. The least he could do was try. The nights were hardest. That was when the old life whispered most clearly. Stars over the plains, smell of campfires, hooves thundering in the distance, wind across endless grasslands, a world that existed only in memory now. He wondered about his friends, the warriors he had ridden with, Quanah and the others, stuck on the reservation, building new lives from the remnants of the old. Were they thinking of him too? Or had they moved on, as the world demanded when everything changed? The Texas sky at night, the Oklahoma sky, the Comanche sky, they were the same. Same stars, same moon, same vast darkness that made you feel small and safe, all at once. Sometimes he would sit on the porch, everyone else asleep, and just look up. Empty his mind. Let the night seep into him. His mother worried. He could tell. Caught staring at nothing. Lost in thoughts he could never fully explain. She'd ask if he was okay. He'd say yes. They both knew it wasn't that simple. How do you explain to someone who's never lived it? The way a place and a people can get inside you. The way survival rewrites you. The way you can belong to two worlds, and neither, at the same time. You don't explain it. You just live with it, day by day. There was a creek near the farm. Nothing special. Just water trickling through Texas hill country. Herman would sit there sometimes. Listen. The sound of water over rocks, the same anywhere. A gentle, endless murmur that seemed to whisper. Everything's okay. Everything keeps going, even when it feels like the world has ended. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him, smoothing the rough edges of the day. The awkward conversations, the weight of memory. The neighbors stared, judging, whispering, watching him try to be someone he wasn't even sure he remembered how to be. The creek didn't care, just flowed, kept making its quiet music, kept being itself. Maybe that was the secret. Maybe you didn't have to solve everything. Maybe all you had to do was keep moving like the water. The stars appeared one by one, as light faded from the Texas sky. Texas stars. Comanche stars. Just stars. Indifferent to human categories, human worries, human mistakes. Herman let out a long, slow breath. The tension in his shoulders eased. The knot in his chest loosened. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. More adjustments. More of the endless work of rebuilding a life. But tonight there was only this. The creek. The stars. The soft, warm Texas air. His mother had told him something in those first days back. She prayed for him every night he was gone. 8 years of nights. Every single night, she had never stopped believing she would see him again. Herman didn't know what to do with that. The weight of her faith. The power of her hope. Maybe he didn't have to live up to it. Maybe he just had to be here. Alive. Present. Maybe that was enough. The creek sang. The stars watched. Herman sat there, caught between two worlds, trying to remember how to be whole again. It would take time. Maybe more time than he had. But for this one quiet moment he was okay. The night wrapped around him like a blanket. Dark. Full of possibility. The frontier had shaped him. Changed him. Made him into someone he had never expected. But it hadn't destroyed him. He was still here. Still breathing. Still trying. A barn owl called from the trees. Its wavering cry almost human. Crickets sang. Tree frogs added their notes. The night was alive. His mother had left a lamp burning in the window. A small golden glow against the darkness. She said she had done it every night, even when he was gone. Keeping a light burning for the sun she never stopped believing would come home. Maybe that was the real lesson of the frontier. Not survival skills. Not fighting techniques. Not the hard, cold knowledge of the wild. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just about not giving up. About keeping a light burning, even when there's no reason to believe anyone will ever see it. Herman stood slowly. Brushed the grass from his clothes. Took one last look at the stars. Tomorrow would come on its own. But tonight there was a light waiting for him. And that told him he was home. Stars that had guided hunters, warriors, and travelers since the beginning of time. Herman thought of all the people he'd known who were gone now. Carnivist, the warriors he'd ridden with. His adopted family on the plains. Quanah was still alive but aging. Their generation was fading. Soon there would be no one left who remembered what the free life had been like. The night was warm and still. Crickets sang. A dog barked somewhere far off. Ordinary sounds of a Texas summer evening. different from the plains and yet, in some ways, the same. Night sounds, life sounds, the world going on the way it always had. Herman's wife came out and sat beside him. She didn't speak, just kept him company in the dark. Over the years, she had learned when silence was needed, when the past pressed too close and words would only get in the way. Herman reached for her hand, squeezed it gently. This was his life now. This house, this porch, this woman, the children sleeping inside, the farm that would need tending tomorrow. Ordinary things, small things, but precious. The frontier had given him so much: strength, skill, stories that would outlast him. But it had taken much as well. Childhood, innocence, certainty, a place in the world that could never truly belong to him again. Maybe that was always the trade. You survive, you endure, you carry the marks. The question isn't whether you'll be changed, it's what you do with it. Herman had done his best. Not always sure it was enough, but he tried. Every day. To be a husband, father, neighbor. To build something worth having out of the fragments left by the wild years. The stars were bright, the moon hidden, leaving the sky to themselves. A river of light stretching horizon to horizon. Campfires of the ancestors, the Comanche said. Herman hoped it was true. Hoped his friends were riding there, free again, wild again, the way they had been before the world changed. His eyes grew heavy. The day had worn him down. The demonstration, the crowds, the memories stirring like dust in a windstorm. His wife tugged gently on his hand. Time for bed. Tomorrow would come early. Chores, work, the endless rhythm of farm life. Herman stood slowly, one last glance at the stars, then followed her inside, into the soft yellow glow of the lamp she had left burning in the window. The same kind of light his mother had left for him all those years ago. Beacon. Promise. Someone waiting. The frontier hadn't had lights like that. Just campfires burning down to coals, fading into darkness. You made your own warmth, your own safety, your own reasons to keep going. But this steady glow was good too. Permanent welcome. Something the wild could never offer. Herman climbed into bed beside her. The mattress settled beneath him. Still not as firm as the ground, still not the plains, but he'd grown used to comfort. You get used to almost anything given enough time. He thought of nights he'd survived. Nights lying down unsure if he would wake on the plains, raids in those early years, the uncertainty pressing in like the heat of summer. Every morning had been a small miracle. Now sunrise was just sunrise. Ordinary, predictable, expected. That too was a kind of miracle, the luxury of taking tomorrow for granted. His wife's breathing slowed beside him, even deep at peace. She had been patient with him, learned to live with his silences, his strangeness, the nights when the past pressed too close. Not everyone would have stayed. She had. Herman closed his eyes, drifted, not thinking, not worrying, floating in that space between waking and dreaming. That gentle borderland where everything softens, where time loses its edges. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. Same wind that had swept across the plains for thousands of years, carrying secrets to anyone patient enough to hear them. And then even that faded, leaving only rest. Dreamless, complete. The kind of rest earned by living fully, surviving what needed surviving, and finding your way home, wherever home turned out to be. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly. The wind whispered. The world kept turning. Herman Lehman slept. He passed in 1932, 72 years old, in his bed, in his house, surrounded by family. A peaceful end for a man who had lived through so much that was anything but peaceful. He was buried in a small cemetery in Loyal Valley, Texas, not far from the place of his capture all those years ago. The land had changed. Fences, roads, power lines, but the hills remained. The sky remained. Some things do not change no matter the years. A few months before his death, a package arrived. Inside, a small golden spoon inscribed, Buffalo Hump Jr. Buffalo Hump, once a Comanche war chief, one of the most feared men on the Texas frontier. The spoon was a gift for Herman's first grandchild, a bridge from one world to another, from the people he had lived with to the family he had built. A sign that bonds forged on the frontier endure, even when the frontier itself has vanished. Herman kept the spoon, showed it to visitors, proof that he hadn't merely been a captive. He had been part of something real, part of a people, part of a way of life that was gone but had been beautiful in its time. Quanah Parker died in 1911, 20 years before Herman. His funeral was one of the largest ever held in Oklahoma. Thousands attended, Comanche and white alike. Buried next to his mother, Cynthia, and whom he had moved to be with him. On his gravestone, resting here until day breaks and shadows fall and darkness disappears. A Christian sentiment for a man who lived between worlds. Herman understood that the living between, carrying multiple selves in one body, 50 years of it himself, never fully Comanche, never fully Texan, always somewhere in the complicated middle. Maybe that was the frontier's real legacy. Not the violence, not the hardship, though there was plenty of both. But the blending, the meeting of worlds, the discovery that people from completely different lives could find common ground when survival demanded it. Kit Carson died in 1868, 48 years old, his body worn by decades of hard living. His last words, they say, a pipe and a buffalo steak, the tastes of the trail, the things that had defined him. Trapper, scout, soldier, Indian fighter, hero, survivor, complicated and human. Jack Hayes lived to 66, wealthy and respected in California. Ranger, soldier, sheriff, businessman. Reinvented himself whenever the world changed. Survival isn't always brute force. It's knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The Buffalo Soldiers served until 1951. Over 80 years of honor, courage, and distinction. Medals of honor, wars fought, barriers broken. They proved again and again that courage doesn't care about the color of your skin. Hannah Dustin survived to 79. Raised her children. Watched her grandchildren grow. Never spoke much of the Merrimack River ordeal. Some things you carry alone. Some things cannot be put into words. All of these lives, scattered across 2 centuries of American history. Different times, different places, different circumstances, but all connected by the same thread. Survival, not just staying alive, but refusing to be destroyed. Finding purpose when forward seemed impossible. All faced moments when giving up would have been easier, but they didn't. Some spark within them refused to die, no matter how hard the wind blew. The frontier tested everyone. It asked, "Can you handle this?" And the land moved on without those who couldn't. Those who could, those who endured, came away with wisdom, strength, and knowledge forged in the fire of survival. Herman carried that knowledge with him every day of his life. In his bones, his muscles, the way he moved through the world. You don't survive what he survived without being changed, without being enlarged. His children and grandchildren inherited pieces of that. Not the skills exactly. Those faded with each generation. But the stories remained. Stories of a family forged in hardship, in wildness, in a world gone forever. Stories matter. They are how we make sense of the world. How we pass on what we've learned. How we connect across time and space to people we will never meet.